Hi, welcome back to Massenet. This week we're going to be talking about the movie Criss Cross. It's from the year 1949 and was directed by Robert Sidomak. Is that how you pronounce it? And it follows this man named Steve Thomas, played by Burt Lancaster, who returns home after being away for a while and reconnects with his ex-wife Anna, played by Yvonne DiCarlo. And they begin an affair, but Anna is married to this gangster named Slim Dundee, and in order to kind of hide their affair as like a cover story, Steve gets caught in this armed car robbery with Slim, and then things go kind of awry at the end of it. So today we're going to be talking about this movie in relation to cultures of prohibition and pleasure. So if anyone would like to kick off the discussion.
I will, if no one minds. I think there's the big overall thing of like, he's the prohibition of like, oh my goodness, how am I blanking on the lead character's name already? Steve? Yeah. Sorry.
I remember it because of that final scene.
Yeah.
Where Anna's just looking at him like, Steve, Steve.
Like, as like the bullets are coming, I'm like, girl, they're gonna hit you first if you're laying in front.
You're super soft scream
she's like about to run away and leave him behind, and then suddenly she's like,
and then Slim like literally pulls up as she does, and she's like, yo, shit, Slim, I'm actually back with you.
He's like, Steve, I changed your mind. I do love you. I won't abandon you to get murdered. But yeah, I think like there's the whole, back to my point, I think there's the culture of prohibition around like, he's so, and like the strides you'll take to like swerve around that culture, because he's prohibited from seeing Anna, because she's married to Slim, which is the best gangster name ever.
Slim Dundee.
Slim Dundee.
So he's literally like, because Steve came back and got a good like working job, like he was gonna actually work. He likes the man he works for, but he is so desperate to like go around this like the prohibition of Anna that he's like, you know what? I'll ruin my job and the company I work for and risk the lives of those I work with just to get to this girl, because he's so desperate to get around like the blockades of what's like their relationship and stuff like that.
Yeah,
so like
prohibition really drives like all of Steve's actions in this movie. Like his family don't want him to see Anna. Like Anna's even like putting up these like red flags, like obvious red flags. Like, maybe I'm not the best partner, but he's like, no, I love you. And then like his best friend, who's a police lieutenant, is like trying to keep him from being with Anna. So you have like all these things, but Steve is like kind of ignoring all of these forces that are trying to prohibit him from this woman, and I guess that ends up being his downfall in a sense.
yeah. And he also like, they were married for like 7 months or something, and like even after that he's like, no, but Anna,
he literally went and worked the hardest jobs possible to try and like forget about it. He left his family to go work in like wasn't it like fields and like coal mine or something
like
and just forget Anna. Like 7 months really took a toll on this man.
It's sort of like Anna is the one thing that he indulges in, but he almost doesn't want to indulge in anything else, because I remember the scene where it's after the armed car robbery goes horribly wrong and he's shot and they take half of the thing, and he's laying in the hospital and they're like, oh my god, Steve, like you're going to get like this big reward, you're going to be set up for life, and he seems almost like viscerally disturbed by like this huge reward and by all of the money he's going to be getting. He doesn't want it. He's sort of just been like, and like by that point he's fully in like Anna's net. He is like whipped for her again. He doesn't want all the rewards of like doing this. He just wants, like he wants the girl. He sort of wants that sense of like stability, and he wants everything to be
I think
okay.
also he felt tremendous amount of guilt for the death of the guy that was in, what did he call him, Pop or something?
Yeah, literally Pops.
Was it actually his father?
Wasn't it his father?
Was it?
I
No,
think
but they
so.
called him Pop for a different reason.
Oh,
Yeah.
really?
There's like a reason they called him Pop.
Yeah, I don't think it was his.
Okay, because I remember he was in the hospital and his mom was there, and I think his brother was there, and he's like, "Where's Pop?" And she's like, "Don't talk about that now."
Oh.
I thought it was his dad, but maybe I'm wrong.
Oh.
His father does show up very briefly for that one dinner scene, and then we also see like his boss, like at the thing for like a very short time. So it's sort of, and they're both old men in a noir movie.
Old
It's very
men.
hard to tell them apart.
Yeah, not his actual father, because I just checked, and there's because he doesn't have a last name. The character, I think it's just Pop.
Oh, interesting.
Like
Oh,
they would have given him the last name Thompson, like the rest of the family. I think if they were to give like the credits.
yeah.
But yeah, I think why he was like, no, don't give me money, because he got this guy that like gave him a job and like was at least a father figure to him murdered out of pure greed.
Yeah. I think that another thing about like how I guess prohibition and like this culture of like enjoyment that we have now kind of like intertwines is that like in films now, I guess you just kind of expect things to like be like romantic and happy-go-lucky. Like, oh yeah, like the guy and the girl, like of course they're gonna get together and they're gonna be happy. But in this movie, Steve really has to work for Anna. He really has to work his ass off in order to like please her and to like make her happy. Like he's really being withheld from this woman where like I guess like in the 1940s they kind of experience that where they're like things don't just get handed to you in the way that like in today's culture we expect things to just turn out okay and we expect things to just kind of align in a way that would please us. So like they were like, oh, this guy's working hard for his woman, and I think that's like part of the reason why I was able to like succeed. But also like this shift now, if this movie was made now, I think people would be like, why is he working so hard for this girl who's obviously like such a snake and she's obviously using him? This is so stupid. But back then it would have been like, oh my god, he's like a man's man who's like, you know, doing whatever he can for his lady. So I think that's like kind of
And then in the end, he doesn't even get her. And I'm also thinking about how, because this is a noir, but like, the main sort of plot, the main focus is sort of essentially, it's kind of like a heist movie, because we have a lot of heist movies, presently. And I think sort of like the expectation whenever you see the main characters planning out, like this major heist with all these like quirky characters, like we have all the side character gangsters and that like expert with like the beard that they like consult at one point who's very eccentric. So when you gather all these people together, like in the context of like a modern heist movie, then you expect something to go wrong during the heist, admittedly, but then they're sort of gonna like work together and get over it and sort of succeed against all odds. In this movie, the heist does not go off because there's all these warnings that, like it's not gonna go well, armed car robberies don't go well, etc., etc. And we would get those warnings now in a heist movie, but sort of like I guess now it would sort of be like almost tending to obstacles that characters have to overcome and win against. And in Criss Cross, and sort of in the context of the 40s and 50s, these are more like essentially death flags, sort of, like warnings that like you shouldn't try this and it's not going to go well and you're not going to get like anything you're hoping to want, you're hoping to get out of this. And I think like partially this is because of, like the whole production codes things where they can't show like literal criminals winning at the end of a movie, but still it sort of says something to the culture at the time of, even if you plan this, even if you do it meticulously, if you're trying to get a goal this big, it's not going to go well for you.
Well, there's also the line that comes up all the time. It's like, you can't rob an armored car. No one's been able to do it. It's impossible. Like, and I like, it's such like setting. It's not even like, I don't know if that's the thesis, but it's saying like so point blank, like a problem versus just, it's telling, not showing in my mind, of them being like, you can't, it's impossible. And then Steve goes, unless you have an inside man, which like sets up the whole thing. But like, it's so like I think they could have shown like, what they should have done is like the first opening scene should have been a failed armed car robbery, and then the newspaper would come across like the, like when they spin the newspaper, and then it'd be like another failed armed car robbery, and then like it would go on. That's what I personally think.
Yeah, I think what definitely said about you kind of like expect things to go wrong in like noirs. I think that's like in Double Indemnity, when like in the beginning scene he was like, I didn't get the girl, I didn't get the money. Like he sets up that kind of hopeless narrative, like for you to be like, oh, how did things go wrong when things seem to be going so right throughout the movie. And something that I found like really, I'm gonna say interesting in the film is something I also noticed in one of the films that I had to analyze for the research paper that we did, which was Gun Crazy. And I've noticed this kind of like stylistic trope in noir, that when there's a getaway scene, when they're driving away from police, they're driving towards the audience, but when they're like getting away like scot-free, it's like when it seems like they're going well, they're driving away from the audience. So it's kind of like that happened in this film, which I noticed, and I was like, wait, no, things are going to go bad because they're driving towards us. They're like driving directly towards their demise, because he was like in the car, he was driving on the highway, and then suddenly it pans to like the front windshield, and I'm like, no. And I'm like, no, he needs to turn back. So there's definitely like things like that. And when the scene in which Slim is in their house and then Anna and Steve like exit the room, and it's kind of the scene where the staircases and the walls kind of frame them in a sense, kind of like the composition of the scene traps them, you could say. Like things like that kind of set up this whole prohibition where like they're not going to get what they want, where they're trapped in this kind of noir-esque theme of like hopelessness. Like you can try, you can work as much as you want in order to satisfy your desires, but in the end you're in a noir film and that's not how things work.
Well, you also,
I feel like
sorry.
When I was watching the film and I was kind of thinking in terms of prohibition, I was thinking about how noir, obviously in the 1940s and 50s, like is based on a culture that's like, or it represents a culture that's like fairly conservative and kind of run by prohibition as like a culture itself. And then we look at films now that I feel like are less of that. And if there are films that are like that, it's reflecting on the 1950s or like something like that. And I think that's kind of the point of view I was looking at when watching the film.
Yeah, and then going back to what Nicely said, I just that like already like knowing, like you go into this with like the fact criminal activity, you have this like gang with a guy named Slim, you have this like love affair with people who genuinely don't work together, they actually probably have a deep hatred for each other based on the fact that they got divorced first. And like, so you know, with all those factors that like it's not, like, there's not going to be a happy ending, and also the fact that it's noir. But then I feel like at least the last few ones we've seen, there's been at least like one person that's come out like okay in it might even be like a side character, but there's at least one person that comes out like they can go on with their life. At the end you have Steve and Anna who are just dead, and then you hear like the sirens come up for Slim, so it's like neither side wins, and you know Slim's gonna rat out the other guys, because the other guys wouldn't rat out Slim because they're afraid of him, but Slim's afraid of nobody, so he'll just rat them all out. He's like, if I'm going down, you're all coming down with me.
And it's sort of like, I think that's sort of the like the prohibition thing, because it's not just, you know, the main noir guy, or, you know, like our main dude who gets his life destroyed and who gets taken down with the heist. It's everyone who surrounds him. It's even people who, like, you know, like in other circumstances, you know, like might get away, because we have seen some films where like the femme fatale figure is fine or at least better off than the main guy, or where the gangsters or the, like, you know, the antagonistic criminal figures are better off than the main guy. But here it's sort of like this, you know, like it's like everyone's tied together, and when the main guy goes off the cliff and everyone's dragged down with him. So it's sort of like when you work for something this big and this, you know, like obnoxiously, I don't know, I guess like, you know, like extravagant goal of, you know, like stealing like $1 million+ from the bank, and trying to get away and get back with your ex-wife and all of this. It's sort of almost like a bit of like an Icarus flying too close to the sun sort of thing, where, you know, like wider society is like, how fucking dare you? You're all going down. You really thought you could do
The
this?
stakes are so high that losing becomes so much.
Yeah.
Like if he had just been like, hey, let's steal like $200, or like let's just steal the girl, then like there'd be less to lose, but he put everything on the line, so he's gonna end up losing everything.
Mhm.
Yeah, there's also like little things I think in this film. Well, I don't want to say little because I think the bar itself, like where most of the film kind of takes place, and like pivotal scenes in the film take place, is just like a symbol of itself in this film of like prohibition. Like it's the place in which he learns that Anna got married and that he's not gonna get what he wants, and he like gets like totally wasted. Like it's and like just the place in itself, how like back like in the back you have Slim doing his job, but also when Steve walks in you see a bar, but then he turns the corner and suddenly it's like loud Latin music and people are dancing and people are indulging themselves and they're kind of like partaking in this culture that we have today of pleasure and enjoyment rather than being like prohibited. So I think that there's like stuff like that that kind of reflects this idea of like people of that time were prohibited, but they did things in order to indulge themselves, that they kind of had to keep hidden, like kind of like this whole hermetic crime, but instead of a crime it's them trying to fulfill these underlying desires that they have through like things like this dance place hidden behind the bar. So that's something that I just kind of picked up on while watching the film.
Like locations in terms of prohibition.
There's also kind of like the Disney, like you have to learn your lesson thing happening here, because every time Steve indulges in whatever, it goes negative. So it's like, I don't even think the director tried to do this of like teaching his audience a lot. Indulge because your life's gonna go to shit. But like Steve drinks and he gets in a fight and he gets kicked out of the bar basically, and he learns all. Like he confronts the tenant. Steve indulges himself in the crime and he gets somebody that he cares about killed. He indulges himself in Anna. He gets him and Anna killed. It's like when Disney tries, like, you know, like Disney, they're like, oh, let's smoke weed, and then like their whole life goes to crap, and then they're like, we should never smoke weed again. We really learned our lesson. Pot is bad.
Yeah. Nancy
Reagan this shit up.
And then it's sort of like what you got, sort of the contrast of all the stuff that Steve is indulging in with, you know, like where it also has scenes with people from his work and people from his family who are very, you know, like proper and restrained and, you know, like law-abiding citizens, sort of, you know, like a nice little picture perfect family scene, like the dinner scene with his family where he sees, you know, like his brother and his brother's fiance, and he talks and he mentions to his parents about like, you know, like, oh, I've been seeing Anna again. They're like, don't see Anna again. What are you doing? Sort of like, you know, his very, you know, like restrained, very orderly, sort of like obedient to society family, essentially warning him, you know, like he expresses his desires to go after this, you know, like indulgent woman because she's not, you know, like the good girl like his brother is planning to marry. She's sort of the opposite of that. And so when he mentions, you know, like wanting to go for that to his family, who I think sort of represent that culture of prohibition, they warn him and they say, like, don't do that, Steve, like, don't do that. She's not good for you. Like, it's not going to go well. And then he goes against it. And then he ends up, you know, like in the hospital, someone he cares about is dead. And then even after he goes after her again, sort of like then the film kills him.
And then even in family, which symbolizes prohibition, there's his brother who's supposed to be like the wild child, like kind of like he gives the energy of like just like the mischievous younger brother. And even he's pretty tame. Like all he does is like try to like tell his fiance like he loves her and kisses her. And she's like, oh my God, no, we can't. Your brothers, we can't show affection. So even that's like really tame.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I feel like now in terms also of like bringing it now to the present, like especially people in our generation, like indulge so much in everything, you know, that we're not really like as interested in watching maybe like prohibition films, you know, and that's why it wouldn't make it in like this era. Whereas in the 1940s and 50s, like that prohibition in a way was kind of like idealized and like romanticized, I feel like.
I wonder what they think about Euphoria then.
I know.
Oh God.
I think they die.
You show someone, yeah, you show someone from 1950 a Euphoria episode and it kills them instantly.
They'd be like, why didn't the main character die at the end?
Like when they were making those memes about like, what was it, like the King of England giving him McDonald's Sprite, or Megan Thee Stallion.
Yeah. And then I think like also like, you know, if like the typical modern audience, like if Criss Cross was shown in like, you know, like a major like blockbuster theater sort of thing, and if people went to see it, I think a lot of, you know, like there would be a lot of complaints at the ending of sort of, you know, people seeing it as like unsatisfying or unfulfilling or things like that, because he doesn't get the money and he doesn't get the girl. I mean, he gets money, but not because of the heist, because he's rewarded for stopping the heist that he was a part of. Because there's this expectation that even if the characters are going for something, you know, like morally gray and something that like we're not supposed to want in real life, that they're going to get away with it anyway, because like we're watching the movie and we want to see, you know, like we want to see that satisfying ending of the characters achieving that impossible goal and getting the thing that everyone told them that they couldn't get and that they should want. And that's what a modern audience would expect, and that's I think what we would get if, like, I don't know, Criss Cross was made in 2020 or something. But you know, like back then, it's not the point of like, the point isn't that the point is literally that the characters aren't supposed to get this, and that these goals are supposed to be unachievable. And there's like there's some things that you shouldn't want, and there's some things that you shouldn't get, which I think is something that we don't usually see a lot of, at least in mainstream Hollywood. Maybe there's some sort of, you know, like there's indie projects and there's smaller projects that definitely tackle these ideas, but you're not going to see this coming from a major studio nowadays, because it's just not what audiences want.
We've been so force-fed happy endings, like even like prequels of movies, like they at least end somewhat happy, even if it leads into like, we know something has to go wrong for there to be a sequel, but it at least ends on a point where you feel like you can leave the theater happy. And like, to just have the, like, if you were to leave a theater with just the ending of Criss Cross, everyone would be like, that's why did I pay like $30 to sit and eat a snack to watch some, like, just people die and not get anything they want.
Mm-hmm. It's sort of like
sorry.
Oh yeah, I was just gonna say, like, the fact that the ending isn't, you know, like that the characters' goals and desires don't get fulfilled, it's almost seen as a failure nowadays, or like a waste of sort of, you know, like if I don't get to see people achieve what, you know, like what they said they wanted to, that I've almost wasted my time, which I think is very, you know, like, I don't know, it's very interesting when you compare, you know, like what people were expecting out of movies back then and sort of like what we see as a waste of time when we go to the theater now.
Well, I think now it as an escapism thing. Like I don't quite know what they would have used in theater then, probably just like for some enjoyment besides like cooking and cleaning and working. But like now we see it as like a escapism from like the mundane circle of life, and like we all know life sucks, and in life you're not going to get everything that you want, but in movies you're supposed to have this happy ending. It's like, oh my god, in the movies, like if only I was in a movie, if only I was in a Hallmark movie. And so it's just like you watch it to see like your ideal life.
Yeah, I feel like also we're fine with going to movies now and like it being a bad ending as long as it's like maybe teaches us something or like references something, whereas like this movie specifically too, it's like the lesson is like don't indulge, and that feels like if a movie now came out and was like that, I'd be like, why did I watch this? Or like this feels like, yeah, like Disney or like something that kids would need, you know, not me.
Degrassi. I've been binge watching Degrassi. This feels like a
I think that whole like 1940s culture is also kind of centered around like working for what you have and like this kind of pridefulness and like building up everything you have. So the fact that like Steve, like I think I said before, just like was willing to sacrifice everything would be kind of satisfying in itself for 1940s audiences because they kind of like, even though the outcome wasn't great, he still sacrificed his life for this woman and for what he wanted. So like they're kind of presented with this character that that like works for what he wants, and he tries to battle prohibition. He like, you know, he like breaks all those quote unquote barriers that are like holding him back from what he wants, and he like makes it work until it doesn't work and he gets shot by Slim. But I think that whole like, I guess like thrill of the chase of like his desires is kind of would be satisfying in itself, whereas like nowadays, like if we got that like all that work and then nothing, it would just kind of unravel all that I guess satisfaction that the movie kind of gave us with like a final scene such as the one in which Anna and Steve get shot by Slim.
I also think this is, at least for me, a different depiction of prohibition, because all I've seen is like the prohibition era where it was like no alcohol, and like you had like the secret rooms people had in their houses that were like these like underground, like you see that, but like I've never seen prohibition seen as like people can indulge, but there's still like the lesson of don't. I've either seen it as like Gatsby or like just like Euphoria. Like there's either like you guys are criminals if you indulge in a little bit, or like go for it, do whatever you want, there are no rules. So this is like a good medium to that.
Yeah, it's sort of like an in-between, and it is fitting because like timeline wise the 40s and 50s are sort of, you know, like the midpoint between the literal prohibition of the 20s and where we're at now. So I guess like, you know, if we consider, you know, like the shift of like attitudes over time, it kind of makes sense that they'd be at this weird midpoint of, you know, like indulge but not too much. They're sort of like there's an acceptable level almost, and if you cross that line, then you're gonna get sort of like a comeuppance that you can't come back from.
Yeah, like there's like this woman that sits at a bar all the time, and she has no like, she doesn't feel like a criminal for doing it, but the movie just depicts her as like, you're kind of like a low person for just sitting at a bar the entire day. Like it depicts her as kind of just like loopy, and like doesn't really know like how to like hold her tongue when talking to Steve, when he gets wasted. And yeah, I just like the whole like, it tells you like, yeah, you can do these things, but you probably shouldn't.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like characters who indulge in this film, such as like the woman at the bar and like Steve, they're kind of like demonized for like doing that. They're like, how dare you just like do what you want and like throw away this thing that you have, such as like this like I guess stable family life, like bringing Anna back into his life. Or like the woman at the bar, like how dare you sit there and just indulge everything that you want without like I guess working. Like that I think like I said, like that label of like lazy or like entitled, I think was like just so looked down upon in the 1940s. So I think that character, the woman at the bar, I forget her name, but like I think she's like a really like great depiction of what it of like prohibition and like how people saw indulgence, just based on the way that she was like presented to us.
Yeah, also how he keeps coming back to her, like it's not just one scene where she appears. It's like a constant reminder.
He kind of sees her at like every checkpoint in the film, because he sees her, you know, like when he first comes back, and like before he, you know, like in that flashback scene where he first comes back to town, he's looking for Anna and he can't find her. He sees her then, and sort of like whenever any major event happens in the film, there's almost like that little check-in with her. He sees her right before, you know, like everything in the heist goes sideways and all of that. So it's sort of like it's her and then the new bartender at the bar. They're almost sort of like weird little like constants in the film that like it's like a litmus test for Steve almost.
Yeah.
Well, like with Disney, she's the bad example character. She's the one you don't want to be. You don't want to become someone that just sits at the bar all day and indulges 24/7.
Mm-hmm. It's also interesting to me how I was just gonna say like because we were saying how she's also an example of indulgence, and I think something that I noticed is sort of like when we see these degrees of indulgence, there's sort of like a degree where people can be at where they're looked down on and they're sort of like seen as shameful, and then when you push past that, when you go a little bit further, there's a degree of indulgence that people are almost scared by and like are made apprehensive by. Because we see that in Criss Cross with the heist. That's the level of indulgence that you're supposed to see as a little bit foreboding and intimidating. It's also kind of similar to what we see like in Sunset Boulevard. I just keep on thinking of like all of those scenes where Norma presents like Joe like with something. She's like, I'll buy this for you, I'll buy that for you, and every single time he seems like almost viscerally disturbed of like, don't buy things for me, don't give me an expensive gift, like don't do this, I don't want any of your money. And is almost like, you know, if people indulge a little, then they're seen as low and they're seen as something to be looked down on. And if people indulge a lot, then it's something almost like, you know, like terrifying and that you should stay away from, like contagious.
Yeah, while I was reading I think it's McGowan article about like this culture of, I guess, prohibition and enjoyment. Um, I know that noir films like inherently have this kind of psychological aspect to them because you're seeing like inside of like people's most deep moral depravities. Like, not to go back to Double Indemnity again, but to go back to Double Indemnity again, how we get his like narration throughout the film, and we get his inner thoughts, and like the indulgence that we see in Criss Cross is just like, I guess, like inherently Freudian, as pretentious as that sounds. And like I think the article really highlighted this, how like the id needs to be satisfied, but the superego wants to kind of repress all of that due to like societal expectations. But like Steve really just kind of just wants, like, his id wants the femme fatale, but the superego says no. Superego is like my lieutenant best friend. So I think this whole thing of like, I think this just like a really, I keep saying interesting. I need to look up synonyms for interesting, but I think it's just a really noteworthy kind of aspect of this film. That's like this whole like kind of Freudian idea of like your deepest desires and your deepest urges being satisfied and then kind of being punished for them. Kind of this whole like idea of like the woman in the bar is like, she's satisfying her id, she's satisfying her deepest desires, but then people like the mother are kind of really worried about like what they've learned through society and how they're supposed to act and how women are supposed to be, which is not how Anna is, because she's like just a very indulgent character, like the wife in Tension. Like, she wants money, she wants the man who can provide her with the most material things. So I think that, like, you know, Papa Freud can be inserted in here very nicely.
Yeah, and then like with Anna, like she's like pure id, and she's sort of like she's very shameless in how like inconsistent she'll be with who she pledges her loyalty to and whose side that she's going to be on. You know, for, you know, like what's going to benefit her and what's going to keep her safe. Because, you know, like I think that's sort of like almost where, because I remember before, like a few classes before we actually watched Criss Cross, we were sort of discussing of like, what is, like, you know, what is it to double cross, or like what is the Criss Cross? And I think that, like, you know, the concept of Criss Cross is exemplified by Anna and her like desire to sort of like to always try to get to that like scenario where she's going to be benefiting the most from whoever she chooses to be with. Because whenever she thinks that Steve is going to like, you know, be the better scenario for her than Joe, she'll go with Steve. But then when situations with Steve, when a situation arises that she knows that Steve won't be able to handle, like when Slim's whole gang turns on him, then she immediately goes back to Slim. When it's revealed that Slim, you know, like he's had enough of her and he won't take her back, she immediately goes back to Steve. And it's sort of like she has no loyalty except to herself and to what she desires and to what she thinks will benefit her.
I think that's true for a lot of femme fatales. They're just like ruled by like their own agency and their own inner desires. Like femme fatales are, I think, like you said, pure id. Like they're just pure like my desires and how I'm going to achieve them, no matter what people think of me. Like the wife in Criss Cross, I'm blanking on her name, but she was just so unabashedly like materialistic. Like Anna is like very clearly like Steve is under no illusion that she's a material woman and that she wants money. I think that's why he divorced her, because he was like working himself to the bone and could not please her. So this whole idea of like just like femme fatales in general just like want to be pleased. And like in this movie, like we see people define prohibition for the sake of being pleased and like experiencing this enjoyment that we get so readily and so in abundance in today's culture.
I mean, that's likely why they're, you know, like the femme fatale is often cast in a very like sinister, you know, like antagonistic light for many reasons, but I think partially because we discussed, you know, like she challenges the nuclear family, which like you can't do in the 40s and 50s, that's unheard of. And then I think like also she's challenging this culture of prohibition and sort of, you know, like you should hold back and you shouldn't indulge some of your desires. She refuses to do that in sort of like whatever iteration and whatever specific character we see her in. it's always this woman that refuses to hold back, and sort of like whatever that means for the specific film that she's in.
Exactly.
Well, it's also, it breaks away from like the idea of like what society wants women to be, which is like just a people pleaser. Like I was listening to this woman, like this podcast today, where someone was like, hey, I like actually like 10 years ago I would not have done this, but I confronted my neighbor over doing something very disrespectful, and I'm proud of myself for actually standing my ground, because 10 years ago I'd have been like, it's fine, it bothers me, but it's fine. And just like, even like, it's just like the idea of like women are like seen as supposed to be people pleasers, and the femme fatales are just like, no, please me. I am most important.
I think those are all the notes that I had about prohibition and enjoyment for this film.
Are we ready for
fun facts?
Yeah.
Fun fact time.
Okay.
Yvonne DiCarlo, who was Anna, also was in The Munsters, by the way, iconic, but, and I want to make sure I just say this right, because I don't want to get the statistic incorrect. She was the first American film star to visit Israel, which is just interesting, because like they send a man, but they sent, you know, this woman who plays a very like sexual like femme fatale character, and then in The Munsters, first one to visit Israel. Intriguing.
I'm going to use intriguing instead of interesting now. So sorry for you. Interesting is just the first thing that pops in my head, and I'm like, I don't want to say it, but I have to say it.
Things can be interesting. You can't ban things from being interesting.
Exactly. It interested me, so by nature it is interesting.
I guess
like you want me to say interesting, Hugh. I'm so sorry. No matter what
the only thing is that you just have to explain what made it interesting.
Yeah.
That's the thing.
Yeah.
It's sort of like it interests you. Why?
Next week I'll say throughout the film, everything.
Oh God.
Everything's happening 24. Yeah.
Anna's gonna say throughout the film, and then I'm gonna say interesting, and the computer's gonna like combust. Like Hugh's rage is just gonna like feed through.
Someone's gonna say impact.
Oh yeah, for the Halloween episode.
Everything's
if we have a Halloween episode, the only descriptions we'll use is interesting and throughout the film. So sorry, Hugh, but here's your warning.
Just an error message pops up.
All right. I'll see you guys. See you guys next week.